Hello and welcome to our latest webinar on Brexit. Thank you to the Gloucestershire Growth Hub and the local LEPs for supporting this event. Today the webinar is entitled What's the Deal? How VAT is affected by the trade agreement. Good morning everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Robert Capper. I'm head of the commercial team at Harris Clark Rickaby's, but I also lead for us on Insights, which includes our work in and around Brexit. I've chaired a number of our events on Brexit, and today's event, as I said just now, is around VAT and how VAT is impacted as a result of the trade agreement. The event today is put on in conjunction with the Gloucestershire Growth Hub, and we thank them and the surrounding LEPs for supporting the event. We're obviously working remotely, as you can all see, so do bear with us, please, for any technical difficulties that we have. The session today is a Q&A style session. I'm pleased to say that I'm only asking the questions, and Sarah Woodall, our head of tax, is answering them. Do feel free to use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screens to ask any particular questions that you're interested in. I would say there we've had a lot of questions beforehand, some really, really technical, and Sarah's been through all of those and is really keen to answer those in detail. So it may be that we struggle to get to the Q&A in the chat, but nevertheless, please feel free to send any questions through. If we don't get a chance to deal with them, we will try and come back to you separately afterwards. And in any event, as we always do, we'll make a copy of the presentation and the Q&A format answers available to people afterwards. So there's nothing else for me to do as the chair other than to start by introducing Richard Morgan from the Gloucestershire Growth Hub to say a few words. Richard, over to you.
Thanks ever so much, Robert. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending. As Robert said, my name is Richard Morgan and I'm part of the EU exit support team at G1st LEP. We're here to offer free support to Gloucestershire businesses which have been affected by EU exit. If you're in Swindon and Wiltshire or the west of England, you can get similar support from your local growth hubs and LEP. Today, we're working with Harris Clark and Rickaby's to show how VAT rules have changed since we left the European Union. If you've missed our previous webinar on countries of origin rules, you can find that on our website, www.thegrowthhub.biz/EU exit, where you'll also find podcasts, frequently asked questions, advice documents, and other resources. There's also 3 more webinars coming up in March covering things like alternative markets, the border model changes, also the services industry. These are also on the Growth Hub website. At this point, I will hand back to Robert and Sarah now to get us started on VAT. But if you have any questions about what free support is available from us, please don't hesitate to ask.
So thank you for that, Richard. And a bit like they say, don't work with children and animals. I think the first lesson of this webinar for me is don't work from our Birmingham office, which has interactive lighting. So apologies there for our lights going on and off. Sarah, over to you to press on with the Q&A. Delighted to be joined by Sarah Woodall this morning. Sarah is a barrister and is head of our tax team at Harris Clark Rickaby's. And Sarah's going to take the questions this morning on VAT. Sarah, the first question we have for you this morning is, what are the implications of the Taxation Cross-Border Trade Act from 2018?
Well, that's the act that meant the UK is no longer a member state of the EU or part of the customs union. But we need to bear in mind that the Northern Ireland Protocol to the withdrawal agreement means that Northern Ireland does remain subject to the EU VAT rule, and in particular in relation to the supply of goods. So there's a bit of a difference there with Northern Ireland.
Thank you for that, Sarah. And are the terms GB and UK important? And if they are, what's the significance of those phrases?
Yes, these terms are not interchangeable and the differences are important. Today we're going to use them, Great Britain, to mean the geographic term, and that refers to the main island and a political term that includes Scotland, Wales and England and their tiny outer lying islands. But the UK will use as a political term, and it includes the whole of Great Britain, but also Northern Ireland as well. So UK is that wider term that encompasses Northern Ireland.
Okay, so people do need to be conscious of that difference there between GB and UK, and be conscious of how they use those phrases. That's helpful. Thank you. What are the differences now in the VAT rules for imports coming into GB, Sarah?
Well, clearly things have fundamentally changed with Brexit. VAT is imposed on imports of goods from the EU to Great Britain. And generally VAT has to be paid at the point that those goods enter the UK, although it can be deferred, and it can be recovered later, of course, once a VAT return is submitted. We did get the opportunity of postponed VAT accounting, and that began for imports from the 1st of January 21. And that enables VAT registered businesses to account for and also recover their VAT in a similar way to how acquisition tax used to operate for all imports. And that's for both EU and non-EU. We've got some special obligations for online marketplaces that facilitate sales. I won't go into those at the moment, but import VAT is not due on consignments of goods that are outside the UK, imported on consignments of £135 or less in value, and that are sold directly to customers in Great Britain. Noting that marketplaces have got different rules, and instead those sellers are required to charge and collect the UK VAT at the time of sale.
Okay. Have any of the old rules for VAT changed or been dropped as a result of the new arrangements?
Yes, they have. So a number of the old rules don't any longer apply, including the distance selling rules, and that's distance sales to GB from the EU or imports subject to VAT. And lots of the EU simplifications and things like triangulation, call off stock, reverse charge for supply and instalment contracts, and also low value consignment relief, which we used to see commonly, no longer apply. But additionally, some processes have changed. For example, UK businesses don't have access to the EU portal any longer from the 1st of April 21. So just a few weeks away, really. And if UK businesses have incurred EU VAT on or before the 31st of December 2020, they've got to get a refund claim in by the 31st of March 2021. That's a really important cut-off date.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. What are the key differences in VAT rules for exports to the EU now?
Well, no UK VAT is charged on exports of goods from Great Britain to the EU, and the distance selling rules no longer apply. Distance sales from Great Britain to the EU are exports from the UK and imports EU member states. And this means that UK suppliers that did used to benefit from the distance selling thresholds may need now to become registered in EU member states. And where the business is not registered in the EU, there is no longer a requirement to submit EC sales lists through Intrastat returns. But those Intrastat returns will be required until 31st December 2021, but that's it.
Okay, there's lots of discussion around the trade agreement and services. What are the key differences to VAT rules on services?
Well, there are consequential changes for services not covered by the general place of supply rule. So, for example, the use and enjoyment provisions, and they sort of effectively shift the place of supply where services are used in the UK, have changed. And they apply to where the supply would otherwise be non-UK, rather than non-EU. Also, the reverse charge provisions for consultancy and professional and services like that, where the service is supplied business to customer. So that's a B2C, business to customer, and the recipient is based outside the EU, also change. So the reverse charge applies to customers based outside the UK. And business to customer freight transport services are also subject to UK VAT in proportion to the distance travelled in the UK. Importantly and interestingly, I think, many of our customers, many of our clients are increasingly using digital services, and you know, we've seen a real change in that as a consequence of pandemic. Businesses applying digital services can now register for a non-union mini one-stop shop. Mini one-stop shop is a bit of a mouthful, but just the abbreviation is MOS. And they can apply for MOS status, one-stop shop status, from the 1st of January 2021, or they can register for VAT in each member state in which they make supplies. So that's an option. And those that are making supplies subject to the MOS scheme are able to register and account for and also make adjustments to supplies made up to the end of the implementation period for a limited period after the end of the implementation period. So that's potentially very helpful to them.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. A very complete answer there on the changes around services and VAT. There's talk of the mention of the EU Single VAT system. What is that?
Well, the EU is in the process of changing to a single VAT system. According to the European Commission, the aim of that is to simplify the VAT obligations for companies carrying on cross-border trades of goods and also services to sort of final customers, and to ensure VAT on such supplies is paid correctly to the member state in which the supply takes place, as well as being sort of in line with the general taxation principles of the destination member state. So it's that emphasis on the supply in which the member state in which the supply takes place is important.
And how is that EU single VAT system being implemented?
Well, it's being implemented over a period of time to minimise the disruption to business. The first measures actually came into force in 2015, but they only covered telecoms, broadcasting, and electronic services to consumers. And a mini MOS was created. So we've tried MOS before as a simplified system to declare and pay VAT on business to consumer supplies in the EU. And as I say, that was just for telecoms, broadcasting, and electronic services. A second set of measures was adopted by the Council in December 2017, and that's referred to as the VAT e-commerce package. And they are set to apply from 1st of July this year, 1st of July 2021. And they extend the MOS simplification to the distance sales of goods and any type of cross-border service supplied to a final customer taking place in the EU.
Apologies there for the technical difficulty with our lights in our Birmingham office just now. I think if the lights go off next time, we'll just leave them off, and I'll be sat here in the near dark, which you probably know about things. You won't have to suffer seeing me. So what's the likely impact on the UK of that new VAT system?
Well, again, our clients are very concerned that this is going to cause disruption and further uncertainty and potentially difficulty for them. The European Commission, however, believes that businesses are going to benefit from a substantial reduction in cross-border VAT compliance costs.
Mm.
And that this will, it's going to work to promote greater cross-border trade. And that also EU businesses will be able to compete on an equal footing with non-EU businesses that are not charging VAT. So that's the aspiration. The main implication for the change is that after July 2021, UK businesses will be able to close their foreign VAT registrations and instead complete quarterly OSS returns for their home country's tax authority in relation to a broad range of cross-border services and also in relation to certain goods. So that will help them. But UK businesses are going to require at least one regular VAT registration in one EU member state to use the service. And the OSS will list sales by country. So the OSS is going to list the VAT percent used, the VAT due, and this has got to be paid to the home country's tax office. I think we've done a bit of a handout that will show what a typical OSS return will look like July 2021. So if people would like to look at that, that's something I think perhaps we could share later. But it includes an analysis of each company and the rate, both the standard and reduced rate, and therefore is quite a detailed document. And it may take people a little while to get used to using it because of the variance in rates between different member states.
Yeah, I'm sure sharing that template would be useful if it's something that people are interested in. Then they can contact us afterwards, and we can look to share that with them. Zero rating. What exactly is zero rating, and what evidence do you have to provide to qualify for that?
Well, the evidence point is a really good point. Put simply, no UK VAT is charged on exports of goods from Great Britain to the EU. That's very straightforward. But it's necessary. You've got to make absolutely sure that the goods are exported and also that you get the evidence of export within 3 months from the time of sale. This can be longer for a small proportion of goods that may need processing before export. And also there's an extension for thoroughbred racehorses for that small part of British industry. The time of sale is the earlier of the day you send the goods to your customer or get full payment for them. So, watch out for advance payments. And you need documentary evidence of goods leaving either the UK from Great Britain or the UK and the EU from Northern Ireland. And this is important because if you don't get the evidence in time, you have to account for the VAT on your return. And if you're using the national export system, you'll get you're automatically going to get an electronic goods departed message when the goods leave the UK. And that actually is helpful and is acceptable as official evidence. So that sort of eases the pressure for those who are using the national export system. In addition to evidence that the goods are physically left, you also need to hang on to and retain safely supplementary evidence, for example, within your accounting system, just to show that the transaction has taken place. We do see clients who believe they've done nothing wrong, and indeed we consider they haven't done anything wrong, but where they fail to keep evidence, it can get very expensive and difficult with HMRC, who are not always empathetic. So being organised and keeping that evidence trail proactively and keeping on top of that and making sure someone is accountable for that is a really a good way to minimise risk.
Okay. Moving subject slightly, long-term records. What evidence is required for long-term records?
Well, and again, you know, this is part of the challenge because you've got to keep this evidence for 6 years. You know, some of our clients have businesses with, you know, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of turnover. So this is vast quantities of evidence, and you need to keep it, and you also need to be able to find it, you know, just not keep it in a warehouse or not just keep it on a laptop. You need to be able to access it and find the precise stuff if asked for it. HMRC can ask to see it. If they think it's unsatisfactory when they look at it, you may have to pay VAT on the goods or the services that you sold. So if you can't get this evidence in time, you've got to account for VAT on your return. You've got to pay it. And you need to keep several records on VAT exports. I hope this isn't obvious, but you've got to keep copies of the invoices and, you know, all of those sort of associated sales documents. You must keep evidence of your register of temporary movements, and you've also got to keep that evidence of export that we've talked about. Sales are noted on box 6 of the VAT return. So keeping it, and also keeping it in such a way that you can find it, continues to remain really important.
Okay, some useful practical guidance there, Sarah, for our attendees this morning. What are the different VAT rules and rates across the different member states? How do they change and vary?
Well, in fact, the EU has a standard rules on VAT, so there isn't variance in the rules, but the EU has standard rules on VAT. The challenge is that each member country is responsible for setting its own rates, depending on the product or the service. Each has a standard rate, which applies to the supply of most goods and services, and that can't be less than 15%. And each member state has 1 or 2 reduced rates, as we've seen in the UK, and they can't be less than 5%. And they may be applied to sort of specific goods and services. And there's a list of those in Annex 3 of the VAT Directive. But in most cases, not to electronically supplied services, there's reduced rates. Okay. There are also some special rates, which were set according to the VAT rates implemented in EU countries before they joined the EU. So, you know, in some cases you've got super reduced rates, sometimes we've got 0 rates, and sometimes we've got parking rates. And all of those details are available and easy to find. The Commission has published a full table of rates on its website, and that's a very good source of information, and we find it helpful.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. What if clients don't want to set up VAT accounts in each country?
Well, if you don't want to set up VAT accounts in each country, you can use the non-union VAT MOS that we've talked about, and the non-union VAT MOS scheme for certain digital services. And the UK government has got some pretty good guidance on how to use the non-union scheme. If you're not able to do that, you may not be involved in digital services. You need to wait until the 1st of July 2021, so another 5 months to go, for the reform that we've talked about. And that's going to create an OSS for other kinds of services beyond digital services, and also certain goods. And that's going to mean that only one VAT registration will be needed, which simplifies things.
Okay. And then perhaps an unusual question, or perhaps not an unusual question. What if businesses don't want their customers to pay VAT?
Oh, well, yeah, this isn't uncommon. You know, there is the option to use the DPP Incoterm, although there's also special provisions for applying to online marketplaces, which could make you a deemed supplier. and liable to pay. So think about that and look at those rules around deemed marketplaces in particular, just to make sure that you aren't deemed to be a supplier. But DPP Incoterm is the potential solution to that.
Okay. For those of our attendees who are interested, we have recently produced a quick reference guide on the Incoterms. And again, if anybody wants one of those, then they can contact us after this event, and we can provide them with a copy of those. It's certainly a useful aid memoir and easy reference point for the Incoterms. Next question, which is quite interesting, actually on the back of our last Brexit webinar around countries of origin. What are the implications if a business imports goods from the EU, then exports them back into the EU afterwards?
Okay, well, for temporary imports, and that means if you're intending to re-export them within a period of 2 years, you can use the temporary importation and get total or partial relief from import duties. If you import goods temporarily,
right, yeah,
and you intend them to be imported temporarily, and it's your intention to re-export them within 2 years, but then you later change your mind and you choose to put them into free circulation in the UK, you then do have to pay duty, import VAT, and also potentially compensatory interest for some types of goods. And I mean, as you no doubt aware, a wide range of goods can be stored using a customs warehouse. So there's a diverse range of stuff potentially covered here. An alternative is to move the goods under the UK, sort of across the UK under a transit procedure. And there's, again, the UK government has published some pretty detailed and good guidance, in my opinion, on applying for temporary imports, and sets out these details quite clearly and in a way that it's relatively easy to understand. So that's helpful, and it's just on the .gov website.
Yes, we commented on our last Brexit webinar on country of origin that actually the .gov and also the .europa website are actually very useful resources for businesses looking out there for information. Moving on then to our next question, which is around services associated with goods held in warehouses. How are those dealt with?
Yeah, well, some services associated with goods that are in a tax warehouse can be relieved from VAT at the time they're supplied. So in some circumstances, VAT will be due on those services when the goods are subsequently removed from the regime. The services eligible for zero rating are restricted to those sort of physical services that take place in the warehouse and are directly associated with the goods held in the warehouse. So that's quite a narrow range, but there is that option and there is that possibility of some of those services being eligible for zero rating.
Okay. Next question's around Northern Ireland. Lots of discussion about how Northern Ireland fits and doesn't fit within the agreement. What use can businesses make of Northern Ireland from a VAT perspective?
From January 2021, you can only apply for multi-state authorisation that covers sites in Northern Ireland and the EU if you're actually established in Northern Ireland. So, you know, there's no scope for creativity or anything artificial in that respect. You need to be established in Northern Ireland, and multi-state authorisation has a different application process. So we do get clients who are wondering whether the differences with Northern Ireland create opportunities to make life easier. But really only if you're already established in Northern Ireland is there any opportunity to do things differently.
What's your thoughts on geographical patterns of trade? How do you think those might change as a result of the changes?
Well, geographical patterns of trade had already begun to change. We're seeing this in our own client base, and the data suggests that this is sort of a wider pattern. I know there's some research on geographical patterns of trade, and that sort of analyses the extent of the trading relationship between the UK and the EU. And for example, in 2019, the EU accounted for about 43% of UK exports. And that was really down. That was down, I think in 2006, that had been at 54%. So we are seeing a decrease there. And again, in 2019, about 52% of imports were from the EU. And again, that's down. It had been 57% about 10 years previously. But, 7 of the UK's 10 largest export markets are in the EU and the sources of imports. So that relationship continues to be important. So the decreases are significant, but nonetheless, the EU remains a very important export market and source of imports, and is likely to continue to do so. The figures, there's an effect called the Rotterdam effect, which is quite interesting and may actually distort some of this picture. Some of these changes could be more significant than they seem. The theory is that the UK's trade with the Netherlands is artificially inflated because of the massive volume of goods being dispatched or arriving from the seaport of Rotterdam, irrespective of the original source or destination of the goods. They may be from or going to outside the EU. And so that kind of makes these figures a bit less reliable than they would otherwise be. And actually the Rotterdam effect has the potential to make the government's own figures unreliable. So that's something that is important to take into account. The data is not necessarily safe.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Talking about patterns a bit further, how do you see the pattern of again, shipping and air freight changing?
Okay, well, again, the UK government has published lots of freight statistics. I think the latest edition I've seen was from August 2020, and that substantiates that short sea freight is falling and fell quite significantly between 2018 and 2019 by about 5%. And the majority of short sea freight, of course, is trade with the EU, and that fell by 4% between 2018 and 2019. So again, short sea freight is in decline. All cargo groups have declined or seen a decline in sort of EU traffic. And in particular, bulk goods have seen the largest decline. But deep sea traffic has increased by as much as, I think, 7 or 8% between 2018 and 2019. And in particular, liquid bulk traffic is driving that increase, which is offsetting declines in other cargo groups. And we've had a look at, there's a lot of data around air freight as well. Air freight for the UK, we're in Ireland, goods moved by air freight account for less than 1% of our UK international trade by weight, although of course about 40% by value. So it's that smaller, lighter stuff that tends to be transported by air and stuff of high value. And of course, it's more expensive to send those products by air. And for that reason, there's that preference for high value goods to be transported in small quantities, and also those sort of perishable goods that arrive. But we are seeing changes, but the main changes that we're seeing in patterns of freight.
Okay. Whilst we're talking about transportation, the Road Haulage Association has done lots of research in and around this issue. Do you want to make any comments about their particular findings coming out of their various different papers?
Yeah, well, yes. Many people will have seen the broadsheet press reports on the Road Haulage Association findings. It's made some pretty serious claims since the 1st of January. And the responses from the UK government, really, which in some respects significantly challenged the veracity of those claims. What I would say is the experience of our clients and people who are seeking support and advice from us does tend to support a lot of what the Road Haulage Association is saying. So, for example, there was a report by the Road Haulage Association. One claim was exports going through British ports to the EU fell by 68% in January compared to January 21 as compared to January 2020. So, you know, that 12-month period had caused a fall in exports by 68%. And again, clients we're working with at the moment are echoing that and talking about the very significant difficulties they're experiencing. Goods that ought properly to be, containers that ought properly to be in Felixstowe, suddenly, you know, are stuck in Rotterdam, and people can't get them out of Rotterdam. But the government's response has been to say they don't recognise that 68% drop, and they don't agree with it. They emphasise that they monitor the flows, and they've got their border operations centre monitoring the flows. And the government says that, for example, in the week to 5th of February, I think is the most recent data that I've seen, both outbound and inbound flows across all UK ports were close to normal. And they say 95% of outbound and 96% of normal for inbound, in spite of the impact of COVID and lockdowns on trade. So you think, well, given the pandemic, 95% and 96% for inbound is a pretty good achievement. That's not what the Road Haulage Association is reporting. And anecdotally, it's not what we're hearing from our clients either, who, as I say, huge frustrations about container loads of stuff just simply not being able to find space in UK ports, and therefore being bounced around and not being where our clients need it in order to use it for the purposes of their trade. So yeah, quite difficult. I don't know if you want some more. There are also some claims about vehicles going back to the EU empty. Do you want me to speak about that?
Yes, by all means, so yes.
Well, again, the Road Haulage Association data, you know, we have no cause to doubt the integrity of that organisation or the reliability of its data. Suggests that between 65% and 75% of vehicles that had come over from the EU were simply returning empty. You know, so, you know, the cost of that is really very significant. And they challenged, we saw that reported in a Sunday newspaper, I think 2 weeks ago. It was very recent stuff. And the UK government response is simply to say this doesn't reflect the data from France. You know, France are keeping records, and it puts this figure at much closer to 50%. So not, you know, in the region of 75%, but much lower, and only 50% of vehicles are going back empty. The UK government's also saying that's an entirely normal part of freight flows, you know, to have empty lorries on the outbound leg from the UK to the EU going back empty. And it estimates that prior to the 1st of January, about 30% of all outbound lorries were empty anyway. So again, very much playing down this difficulty. So I guess the UK government is saying, you know, empty lorries going back maybe up from about 30% to 50%, but actually the Rail Haulage Association is saying it's nearer 75%. And again, the concerns that we're hearing from our clients would really echo those greater numbers that we've shared from the Rail Haulage Association. But I have to say, our client base is relatively small. It's not as great. The data is not as secure as you know, the large associations and UK government. But there is a real mismatch between what's being reported and what the UK government currently is acknowledging to be the case.
Thank you for that perspective, Sarah. That's always useful for attendees of webinars to hear our perspective on some of the bigger issues that are pressing at the time. Sarah, two more questions, if I may. There's talk about a 6-month grace period. What actually is that? And are there any physical checks going on?
Okay. Well, yeah. Since the 1st of January, the UK has had discretion. You know, we're not in the EU. We have discretion, and the UK government's got discretion to use its own approach to goods imported to Great Britain from the EU. And the UK decided to implement full border controls on imports coming from into Great Britain from the EU. Full border controls. There is a grace period that has been offered, and it's effectively introduced 3 stages to the introduction of all of these changes. And again, with the aim of helping UK business come to terms with the changes and to get it right. So we've got 3 stages of introducing these controls until the 1st of July 2021. So from January, you're probably aware, traders importing standard goods, so everything from clothes to electronics, needed to prepare for basic customs requirements, you know, keeping those sufficient records of imported goods and having up to 6 months to complete customs declarations. Now, whilst tariffs need to be paid on all imports, payments can be deferred until the customs declaration has been made. And there will be checks on controlled goods, so goods like alcohol and tobacco, for example. And businesses also, it's important they consider how they account for VAT on imported goods. There'll also be physical checks at the point of destination or to other approved premises on high-risk live animals and plants. So that's a relatively small range. But from April 2021, so just over a month away, all products of animal origin, so that's meat, pet food, honey, things like milk, eggs, products like that, and all regulated plants and plant products also require pre-notification and the relevant health documentation. And then from the 1st of July, so, you know, how long is that now? 4 or 5 months to go. There are more requirements. So traders moving all goods will have to make declarations at the port of importation and pay the relevant tariffs. Full safety and security declarations will be required. For SPS commodities, there's going to be an increase in physical checks, also the taking of samples and checks for animals, plants and their products. are now going to take place at GB border control posts. So this approach is for sort of GB EU trade, and it doesn't apply, so it's important to remember, it does not apply to the flow of trade between Northern Ireland and Ireland, or Northern Ireland and GB, because that's covered by the withdrawal agreement. So things are different in relation to Northern Ireland because of the withdrawal agreement, as we described at the outset.
Thank you, Sarah. Last question this morning, if I may, please. What else is the government doing in terms of VAT and the VAT changes? Anything else that you want to touch on?
Well, it's doing a lot. You know, it's a challenging time for all of these changes for obvious reasons. Leaving the EU was not going to be easy, or not going to be without challenge, and leaving, you know, at the time of global pandemic really has the potential to make it extremely difficult. The UK government has been doing a lot. It has been actively building new border facilities in GB, obviously, for carrying out the required checks, including customs compliance, transit, sanitary and photosanitary checks. And it's also provided sort of targeted support to ports to help ports build new infrastructure. As I've said and alluded to before, whilst that is happening, and we acknowledge that's happening, we nonetheless see many of our clients who are significant importers finding real difficulties at the ports, just not being able to get space at the ports for the containers that they need to bring in, and there are some very real difficulties in that regards continuing at the moment, but that support is happening for new infrastructure. And where there's no space at ports for new infrastructure, and I think Felixstowe is an example of that, there are also UK government plans to build new inland sites where these checks and other activities you know, can take place. So this is all very much work in progress. These new facilities in some sites have, you know, the construction has begun, and in other sites is planned. So a lot of thought and resources going into this, but it's very much work in progress. And we are seeing it is a very challenging environment for many people who are importing large quantities of goods from the EU.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. That concludes the questions I want to ask you today. We have had a number of questions in the Q&A, which I think require quite detailed and considered answers, Sarah. So I don't think it's fair to put those to you. But what we will do is, where people have asked it and disclosed their name, we'll look to follow up with them afterwards. So please don't think your questions will go unanswered. But Sarah, before I finally wrap up, is there anything else that you want to comment on about VAT and the VAT changes more generally?
Well, it's very, very challenging. From what we're seeing, many importers and exporters are doing really well to keep abreast of those challenges. But reaching out for help when you need it is always a sensible thing to do. So if we can help, or if your accountant can help and you feel you need support, I guess our advice would be to get that support early. It's much easier to be proactive and get things right early than have sort of the difficulty of a challenge by HMRC and sort of having to revise an approach that you've adopted believing it was right under the pressure from HMRC. So be careful, look at what guidance is out there. The UK government guidance, actually, in my opinion, is pretty good. There's a lot of stuff on the EU website. Again, it's massively informative, and you know, the English is spot on. But if you can't address your questions that way, do ask the accountant that you're working with, and if necessary, get specialist advice and get it early. It's much better to nip these things in the bud than to face a difficulty with HMRC, which can be hugely time consuming, sort of emotionally expensive, and also potentially expensive in terms of costs.
Thank you, Sarah. I think I'd echo those comments, and I just made similar comments at the end of the country of origin webinar last week, which is that the issues are out there. We all know the issues are out there. Deal with them up front. Get advice from your professionals. In this case, reach out to your accountants and tax advisors and lawyers as necessary. And I know there are a number of accountants and tax advisors on the call today. And then, as you say, Sarah, if necessary, get detailed advice. But actually, there's lots of information out there before people need to reach out to their professionals, whether it's on the government website or the EU website. But there's no reason why businesses shouldn't be able to deal with all of those issues and move forward and carry on importing and exporting as they were before. As you say, better to deal with the issues up front now rather than run the risk of a HMRC investigation with all the risks that are inherent on that later. So thank you very much, Sarah, for answering those questions. Lots of detailed questions covered there. We will be following up afterwards with a copy of the notes that accompany Sarah's answers to the questions. Those that have asked questions in the Q&A and given us their name, we will follow up with them as well on the Q&A. If you want a copy of the template that Sarah referred to, again, reach out to us so we can let you have that. And also the quick reference guide I referred to, we're happy to let you have one of those as well. And more generally, of course, if you're looking for advice and assistance in and around Brexit, and you think we can help, we'd be only too pleased to do so. But on that basis, thank you very much, everybody, for attending this morning. And we'll leave you to go about the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert.